Hello, everyone, and welcome to this get-together brought to you by Get Abstract. My name is Kirsten Miller-Dauberman, and I'm going to be your host for today's discussion. As you may have noticed, we recently paused our daily get-togethers to allow some other very important conversations to take place. But today, we are back addressing the topic of how to lead challenging conversations. And specifically, we want to look at the leadership skills and qualities that are required for today's leaders in order to appropriately address issues of racism and bias in the workplace, and how to ensure that company-issued statements actually activate real and lasting change. We here at Get Abstract think that understanding and knowledge are the first step to making those meaningful changes. So in that vein, we are sharing resources for free on our journal under the heading Educate Yourself, featuring the most relevant resources from across the Get Abstract library and journal around the topics of race, bias, inclusion, and social justice. So we want to make sure that you have those resources and you know about them. And after this get-together is over and you want to search out some of that yourself, then please feel free to do that. We want to be a part of that effort. So that's why we're having this conversation today. And our guests to discuss this incredibly important topic are leadership consultants, Ahli Moore and Bill Treasurer. Welcome to you both.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks
for
having
me on.
Yeah, it's so great to have you both. And we really are thankful for your voices today and you're taking the time to be here. So first of all, why don't you let us both know where you are joining us from today? And we'll start with you, Ahli. Where are you joining us from today, and what has your world looked like in the last month?
So today I'm actually in Miami, Florida. I live and work out of Atlanta, Georgia, but I came down to South Florida for the week. And my world's been pretty busy, COVID aside, right? What's been happening in the US and around the world the last couple of weeks has kept me pretty occupied with helping companies with their statements and just exploring this continuous topic of diversity in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill, where are you joining us from today?
I'm patching in from Asheville, North Carolina. It's in the mountains. If you're going to be quarantining in the United States, this isn't a bad place to be. I'm home with 3 teenagers, which, has ups and downs. But all in all, staying busy, staying healthy, staying sane to the best of our ability in this crazy time.
Yeah, absolutely. So to begin, what motivated both of you to be a part of this conversation and to try to tackle these really difficult conversations? There was one particular instance that motivated you both to want to talk about the issues of racism that are affecting our country, but also cultures all over the world in a very direct way. You want to give us an insight into that incident?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ahli, let's start with
So to begin with, this topic is something that I've spoken on for years. Black people in America and around the world talk about this topic because it impacts their daily lives. Specifically, before this most recent incident, Bill and I had talked for maybe 3 years ago about doing a dialogue on racial injustice, how to ask difficult questions, how to engage in dialogue. And we talked about doing it, but we kind of put it on the shelf. But then maybe a month or so ago, we were recording a webinar. We were 2 panelists on a 4-panel webinar discussing leadership after the COVID crisis. And it had nothing to do with race. It was a very mixed audience from people around the world. But at the beginning of our Zoom meeting, some racist Zoom bombers got onto our call and first started by annotating the N-word across our screen. They started putting racist remarks in the chat room and even over our audio. And so we had to pause our meeting, right? And for the majority of our 75 or so participants, it was a really big shock. For me, I made the comment to Bill, this is what I face and live with, not on a daily basis, but pretty consistently, where people are racist and they are interrupting your meetings for no other reason but to espouse racism and their racist ideologies, right? So Bill and I reignited around this idea of doing this racial dialogue talk in response to what happened during our Zoom meeting. It just so happened the timeliness of this was spot on, because no more than a week later, that's when the George Floyd murder happened and the country erupted in protest around racial injustice. So this is a topic that is ongoing. It was here before our discussion. It's going to be here after our discussion, and we are just part of a much bigger conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And Bill, how about you? What motivated you to get involved in this? You know, what sparked your sensitivity to this issue? And, you know, why are you here today and this topic important to you?
And in the same way that Ali mentioned, he and I had been thinking about this for years. I think maybe the first time we talked about doing a dialogue like this was during the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, Missouri, which, you know, sort of exploded on the scene. And what happens is we get these news stories, get this news cycle and a big explosion in the newspaper, and then people fall back asleep, and then it comes around again a few years later, and this time Ali and I were like, enough, we got to take this off the shelf and we've got to do something about it. My own journey has been helpful to this. I grew up in a community that was you know, a racist community in a racist household. It's not you know, I've heard the N-word when I grew up. Maybe my experience might be different than some of the other folks, but probably not a lot different than many folks. And then I got into a relationship at one point with a woman who was a white woman, but her mom, when they had gotten divorced, her parents remarried a black person. And so I was in this relationship for 8 years that was a multiracial family. And eventually I ended up living with that family for 3 years. And so now all the stereotypes that I had before about with, you know, sort of a racist construct in my head, now I'm living with people that are white, black, multiracial, and we're having Sunday meals together, and we're celebrating birthdays together, and we're going to confirmations together, and we're having arguments together, and we're cheering on the Green Bay Packers together. And it reduced the amount of ignorance inside of me. And that was a sort of enlightenment that was very helpful to me. And when I get to this stage here today, I just know that you can't stay on the sidelines. You got to pick a side, and you've got to be on, in my opinion, be on the side of what is justice, what is, you know, what is the golden rule, what side are you going to stand on? Because staying in the middle, saying I don't want to take a side, is not the right place to be. And that experience is the experience that I had growing up, sort of helped me get to where I am today. And I got a lot of learning to do, and a lot of learning from the African-American community and others as well. But I'm here to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. As are we all. Thank you both for sharing and for taking, you know, the time and the vulnerability to be here and to talk about this really difficult topic. And let's dive straight into leadership and discussing these difficult topics in the workplace. It might seem like common sense, but Ali, why is it important to talk about race and racism directly in the workplace?
Well, because it's there, right? Organizations, teams, businesses, they get their cues from their leaders, and we require that our leaders of our respective workplaces, could be a small organization, could be a large organization, you know, they set the tone for the rest of the workplace. And if this is something that's impacting your particular workplace, it also impacts the bottom line. It impacts the turnover rate of your employees. It impacts the solutions that you come up with. The lack of so when we talk race, there are multiple facets of this, right? There's diversity within the workplace. There's equity in the workplace. There's inclusion, and then there's racism and anti-racism. They all bring on a different set of responsibilities, a different conversation. You know, I could have a very diverse workplace in terms of the makeup of my employees, but racism could still exist there in terms of those employees having a fair shot to reach the upper levels of the company, the same opportunities that other people within the company have. Or I could have a very homogenous workplace with no diversity and also no racism. So when we talk about this, we have to define exactly what it is that we're talking about. And it's different for every company. There's a different flavor that has to be addressed. But at the end of the day, Bill, it impacts your bottom line in addition to the people's morale and the people who are there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill, what exactly is the role as leader in setting up these conversations? What are some of the first steps that they can take to respond?
I think first and foremost, the leader has to be a role model of a value system. And if your organization has a value system and a stated, group of core values, then you have to embody that. You have to live that value system. And most organizations that have a core value system have, stewardship and teamwork. Let's hope that they have something that explicitly talks about diversity. And if it doesn't, it could be time to refresh the core value system. But you have to live out that value system. You have to be the adult in the room. So when we're having these conversations, you have to sort of call forth the adult in others. You have to have a sense of humility, be willing to learn yourself, particularly if you are, not in a diverse population yourself as a leader, and have some humility and listen to those around you and the counsel and guidance of those around you. So those are some of the things that I think that a leader has to be, and willing to take bold action. I think it was Martin Luther King who said, there's never a wrong time to do the right thing. And this is a time to take a stand as a leader. And leading means to get out in front. And if your organization is lagging behind, then for you to sort of force a new statement about what your company is going to be about, and change practices in the company if that needs to be, if that's what it takes to take bold action to make it a more diverse workforce, then you have to step out as a leader and be bold and be courageous, recognizing that some people are going to disagree with your stance.
And can I add a couple of things to what Bill said? Because I think Bill is spot on. When a leader sets those examples, they have to do that both in action along with those words. We often, and we're seeing it right now with all of these statements that are coming out from companies. Say, we stand in solidarity, we support the African-American community. And my question is always, do your actions match those words, right? And it's the same thing within the organizations. The leader often is a very polished person, and they rose to that position because he or she knows how to speak and articulate a vision. They also back that vision up with action. And so a leader has to be consistent with their behaviors as they're setting these examples. They also have to create a safe space for the employees who may feel uncomfortable having these conversations. The leader is going to be the one who says there are going to be no negative repercussions for bringing this up and discussing this. Because I want to talk about race relations at work doesn't equate to me stirring up the pot or doing so. I have countless stories of people who have brought an issue to management or leadership only to be reprimanded for them causing an environment where people don't trust each other. And that's what they were trying to combat. And so the leader has to have visibility to this, support those employees, create a safe space by leading by example, and then also allocating the resources to combat these things. If this is happening in your workplace, it's just as important as any other issue that you allocate real dollars and real programs to address it. Right? Words aren't enough.
Let me jump in as well I think a good example of this recently is NASCAR, right? NASCAR has said that they want to be a family sport, representing family values. And then we see, Bubba Wallace sharing about his own experience. And the head of NASCAR says, you know what? He's right. If we're saying that this is where we want to go and be a family-oriented sport that others can enjoy, then we shouldn't have Confederate flags anymore. And now that they had a noose in Bubba Wallace's pit right away, they got the FBI involved. That's action, right? And banning Confederate flags, that's action. And does that mean that leader is stepping into a hotbed and that there's going to be plenty of flack and lots of turbulence because of it? So be it. That it's about embodying a value system and taking lead and being on the right side of history, not being, silence at this point is complicity.
Yeah, and Allie, I want you to expand on this idea of pushback that you might get within the organization, specifically maybe leaders that look at the workplace and say, well, we have a diverse workforce, as you mentioned, but there's no racism here. Can you talk about what microaggressions are? Because for people maybe who haven't heard the term, they hear it and they don't know what that means, or they think it's overblown. What are the importance of addressing microaggressions where there might not be as horrible as what happened with Bubba Wallace and the noose hanging in his pit? But what are microaggressions, and how can they be as hurtful and as destructive to an organization? Why do we need to address them?
Yeah, so microaggressions typically stem from lack of exposure. And when I say lack of education, I'm not talking about formal education. We're not talking about someone's, IQ and, what level of education they matriculated through, but education around diversity and cultural sensitivity. So a perfect example recently in the United States, the multiple brands, the Aunt Jemima, Mrs. Buttersworth, Uncle Ben's rice, they all decided that they were going to change that imagery. And people, some people were up in arms and said, well, why? It's a picture of an old lady, it's a picture of an old man. It's because they are not aware of where that imagery comes from. Aunt Jemima in particular is the direct depiction of a blackface minstrel show in which one of the characters was Aunt Jemima. So the Aunt Jemima brand of whatever that is, pancakes or syrup or whatever it is, that is a reflection of a blackface minstrel character. Now, you take that a step further, and I know personally of a workplace incident where it was a white woman at work called someone else an Aunt Jemima. And she said, well, she does look like Aunt Jemima. She didn't understand where that phrase originated from. And so part of the microaggression is the lack of understanding, the lack of sensitivity, the lack of cultural education that we have to help people understand. Bill and I talk about this where he may say something and it's out of cultural ignorance. It's not out of him being ignorant. It's not out of him trying to be racist or whatever else. It's that he was never aware that this was something that is an issue. There are things that I run across to this day as a middle-aged Black man that I do research on. Said, is that the origin of that term or that phrase? And it still blows my mind, right? And I've lived with it my entire life. And so when you take that into the workplace, there are things that happen every day that people don't realize are offensive to other people. There are also things in terms of microaggression, phrases that we may use, or just the way we may term another group or the work ethic of another group, or anything that does with generalizations. And you can say, I'm not racist, but you're making a generalization about other people at work that now impacts your workplace. It impacts their ability to get their job done, and the morale of them coming to work could be considered microaggression. So microaggressions are not the overt racist acts, but they're things that stem from our lack of understanding, that once we start to peel back the layers of the onion a little bit, we can understand why they would be insensitive, racist, or aggressive towards a person of color.
Yeah. Thank you so much for explaining that more concretely. And it's something that even before these recent events brought the issues of racism and racial justice even more to the forefront where they deserve to be. The idea of cultural sensitivity is so essential. And Bill, I'd love to hear your thoughts on your advice for leaders who might be afraid of having these conversations because they're afraid of the pushback, or they're afraid of using the wrong terminology, or otherwise committing a microaggression themselves. What advice would you give to leaders who are maybe just very, very fearful in this moment of how to address these issues?
Right. Well, not to make light of it, but in the South, we would say, suck it up, buttercup. It's like, yes, you're going to be in an uncomfortable situation, and sometimes you're going to feel you're going to feel uncomfortable yourself. But that's what courage is. Courage moves into discomfort. That's where the courage is, not in comfort. And you might get some feedback yourself about something that you need to change. And we have to be willing to allow ourselves to experience somebody holding up the mirror to our own ignorance. You can be innocent in your motive by asking a question that you don't see as hurtful, and then find out from the other person that actually it's an ignorant question, and here's why it's ignorant, and then you feel uncomfortable. And I'm still, you have to be willing to move into that space, and I'm still doing it. After Ali and I taped the 4 sessions that we taped, I had a friend of mine listen to all 4 sessions, and he called me and he said, "Bill, hey, I just want to, sort of coach you. In the session that you did, you used the term mulatto. Now, that might have been appropriate in the 90s, but that's not the term that we would use now. We would use the term multiracial." Now, I could get defensive. What do you mean? Why are they always changing the words? Or I could just accept it and go, okay, he's educating me, and it's embarrassing, but you have to be willing to be embarrassed. You have to be willing to have your ignorance called on, whether you're leading that conversation or whether it's coming from the conversation that you're having. So I guess that would be my response is it's going to be uncomfortable. These are not the fact that we've been avoiding them for years and years and years is we've been avoiding the discomfort. Well, it's time to get uncomfortable and get into these conversations.
Yeah. I think it's like, I'm uncomfortable. I mean, really, look at what the Black community has faced over hundreds of years in the United States. I think that we can be a little uncomfortable. If I can go so far.
So as Bill was talking, I actually, on my desk, I had a paper that I'd saved from years ago, which were some examples of racial microaggressions. And so it's like, here's the theme, here's the microaggression, and here's the message. And so just some of the questions that even I've been either asked at work or told at work, things like someone thinking they're giving a compliment by saying, "You're a credit to your race." They think they're giving me a compliment, but basically what they're saying is, I devalue your race and I think you're better than the rest of the people that I consider to be your race. That is really that's a form of racism, but that would be termed microaggressive, because the person saying that actually is considering that to be a compliment to me, when in fact the meaning behind it is, I don't think much of your race. I think highly of you as an example of someone who has gone above my interpretation of your value.
Yeah, another one that I'm sure, one that Ali we've talked about before, but if somebody says, Ali, you're very articulate, as if it's supposed to be some sort of a surprise that only white people are articulate. You may not know that is a microaggression, but it is. Oh boy,
absolutely.
I can point out many of them.
Yeah. Ali, I'd love to ask you, especially young people, my generation, millennials and younger, often point to themselves with pride and say, we're colorblind. But that actually can be a destructive mindset. Why should people and organizations not strive to be colorblind?
Okay, so I'll approach the answer to this from a couple of different perspectives. One is it's inaccurate. It's a fallacy. And I get it. It's a philosophical statement to say I'm colorblind, right? But the actual day of, when you're at work and you see people of different nationalities, ethnicity, colors, unless you are physically colorblind, you do see them. So subconsciously, you are still seeing those colors. What you're saying, in effect, is, what you're trying to say is, I don't see a difference in the colors. And I would reverse that and say there's actual value in diversity, diverse backgrounds, diverse ethnicities at work. In order to if you're in a sales position, if you're in a customer facing position, no matter what your company is or your organization is doing, there's value in having different genders, ages, ethnicities, religions, all contribute to the solution, to the sales, to the product, to whatever it is that your company does. And so, as opposed to saying I'm colorblind and basically insinuating that I don't see, a detriment to your color, you're just as equal as me. Why don't you say, I see the colors and I value them, I acknowledge them, and I see it as a benefit to our company. I see the rich value of all of these different backgrounds coming together to make a more complete solution. And often what people, and it's changed over the years with the millennials, but in the past, if you saw a color, or if people said they saw a color, they were equating that with not being as equal as whatever their own color was, right? And so whether you say you're colorblind or you're not colorblind, I think you actually see those colors. And what I would encourage you to do is say, I see those colors and I value what they all bring, as opposed to I'm colorblind, or I think my color is superior in some aspect. You don't have to run away from it. You don't have to hide from it. You can see it and you can acknowledge it and you can value it.
And I would add that if you want to know anything about implicit bias, you need to know about color differences. Ali knows, I'm sure that you know, Kirsten, as well, that there have been many, many studies about looking at a resume, right? And then deciding to bring somebody in based on their resume. If you change the name on the resume so that it sounds like it's different ethnicities, for example, that person's less likely to be brought in for an interview in the first place. So there's implicit bias that goes on, that just being aware of color, it allows you to recognize your own implicit biases. I also think that this idea of being colorblind is akin to saying, all lives matter. All lives matter. It's like a diluting down, and it's a way of saving face or something. Why not just to acknowledge there are color differences, there are gender differences. Those differences should be embraced. They should be understood. We should understand the value that different groups bring to the workplace. So, being color conscious, I think, is not a bad thing. It can be an asset to a company.
And a quick twist on that example that you used, Bill, because that study has been done and proven, so many times that the name on the resume makes a difference, regardless if all the skills are the same. They redid that study, and I forget who did it, but they redid that study using a law brief, and they submitted the exact same briefing article, whatever it was, from lawyers to a law review board, and just changed the name. And the responses, when it was the white sounding name, were that, this is an excellently written piece. It fully represents, understanding this issue that's being debated. And we would love to have this person to be a part of our law firm, blah, 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 blah. When they changed the name to a more ethnic sounding name, the responses were, how did this person get into law school? This is poorly written. There's bad. And it was the exact same brief. It was the same thing. So that study, when you change the names of the resume, change the name on the law briefing, we do have biases. We have biases across the board. And so to be cognizant of that is part of understanding yourself and understanding that color does play a role in your perception.
So much wisdom, and I'm just taking it all in and learning so much from you both. And we do have to wrap up our conversation. Yeah. I want to end with just a few questions. One is, okay, so talking about implicit bias, learning about these things, and then taking the action steps within an organization to make real changes that go beyond the company statement. I want to talk about doing that in the virtual space that we're all in. Some people are going back to work, but a lot of people are still doing video calls, video conferencing, and not with their peers face to face. And they might also be supplementing work with social media time. And we all know just how crazy social media is right now and the commentary that's going on. It can be extra difficult for leaders to reach their employees and build unity around a vision for how the company is going to change.
Yep.
You both are leadership consultants. How would you recommend starting to address these issues and these changes in the virtual world that we're working in now?
You want to start off, Bill?
It's a hard question. It is. I can say, take a first step, whatever the first step is. In our case, Ali and I taped the 4 sessions, and we did that virtually. He's at the time was in Atlanta, and I'm up in Asheville. We taped those together. We didn't let the virtual dynamic stop us. In fact, we leveraged it, right, and then put it out on social media. And I think that it's hard. If you're leading a team, you might want to have one-on-one conversations first. I can tell you this. This is maybe the point for me that is important. Whatever step you take, you may not anticipate the positive echo that it can have. I work with a construction company in Chicago, right? And it's owned by older white males. And it's a family name on the business. And they put together a statement about how they're addressing this issue. And Ali read the statement, and we agree that it's very fine, right? And then I found out another company that I work with then called me and said, tell me about this statement. How was it born? What led that up to it? They got curious about it. And I know the CEO over here called an African-American person in their workforce because he now wanted to understand what their experience was working in this other company. So there's a positive echo effect that can happen just by taking whatever your first move that it might be. And they didn't let the fact that it was all done virtually, sort of stop them. But that would be my first response.
Yeah, so I would echo Bill's sentiments, but I'd also say that racism in the workplace has been here. It transcends revolutions in industry. It transcends social evolution. It transcends all of those things. It transcends technology. And so when we talk about the need to address it, we can't use the new normal of working in dispersed workplaces as an excuse to say it's going to be so difficult to do this. Well, it was here before that. The issue itself transcends that technology, and so our response to it has to transcend technology as well. And we talked about this earlier in this session. A leader's responsibility is difficult, and a leader is in that position because she or he has to take one for the team at times. And having these conversations and addressing them should not be predicated on whether I have the ability to have them face to face with you. We see after the stay-at-home orders and everybody working from home, how we all adjusted to our actual work life. Well, we're going to have to adjust to these quote unquote difficult conversations as well. I think another thing that we can do is not start every time we talk about this, not start by saying, this is going to be a difficult conversation. And we can start by saying, this is a necessary conversation. This is a conversation that impacts our ability to be productive and have a strong moral fiber. So we're going to have it. And while it may not be the ideal setting for it, there's absolutely no way we're going to skirt around this issue. That's what a leader does.
Such a hopeful note to end on, actually, rather than approaching it as a difficult conversation, changing the game and saying, this is going to be a necessary and good conversation, because it's going to build the kind of future that is healthy, not only for us as a business, but for us as people, to treat everyone with the dignity and worth that they deserve, to see color, value different perspectives, educate oneself, and make lasting change. Really, really cool. I can't thank you both enough for being here and for taking the time to join this conversation.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing to end with. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Ali. I was going to ask you for your book recommendation. I was going to ask you both for your book. At Abstract Library or for something else. Go ahead.
Yeah, there. Earlier you asked about subtle acts of exclusion, and that's actually, or microaggressions is what you asked about. There's a book. I actually attended a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and it addresses microaggressions, and it rephrases them as subtle acts of exclusion, because it talks about microaggressions from the standpoint that at their core, they start to exclude parts of your workforce, and it's subtle acts because you may not even know that you're doing them or that they're being done until it starts to, cause an issue. But it's a book. It's in your library at Get Abstract, and it's written by Tiffany Jana and Michael. I don't know if it's Barron or Baran, but Tiffany Jana and Michael Barron. So that's one. And then there are also a couple of articles that I would recommend that are in the Get Abstract library. One is The Guide to Allyship. It's an article by Emily Lamont, and the other, it's actually an article by several authors as part of the Boston Consulting Group, and it's called How Diverse Leadership Teams Boost Innovation, because at the end of the day, diversity is innovation and it's evolution of your business. So those are two articles in one book that I would highly recommend.
Wonderful. Thanks, Allie.
Good.
And Bill?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me thank Get Abstract for organizing this event. And of course, it's great to do it with you and Ali as well. It's a really useful conversation. And let's remember, too, that when we're saying that these are necessary conversations, they need to be ongoing conversations. They're not just one moment in time and now we're done with the conversation, right? And let's also remember that, that it's our choice. Where are we going to stand? We need to stand somewhere. And this is the moment to take a stand. For me, a book that I would recommend that was so eye-opening for me when I read it, I think in 2015, is Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. At least for the experience in the United States, it was eye-opening to me. There was so much about Black history and the Black experience that I had no idea about. And it that was very instrumental for me. So if you're going to pick up any book, that would be one that I would. It's a great start.
Wonderful. Well, that is our show for today. That is our get together. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Bill. You've both been a joy, and I've learned so much from this conversation, and I hope that everyone watching has as well, and that you're inspired and motivated to learn more yourself. And then if you're a leader, especially, to take charge of whatever situation that you find yourself in, to use the tools that you learned about today and make lasting change. Thank all of you so much. Be sure to check out getabstract.com and those journal articles. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Bill. And we will see you again soon. Ciao.
All right. Take care.